Hello and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Beth Strobush. I am the PR Director with Orbita, and we are very thrilled to have you here with us today. Thank you for joining. We are really pleased to have our partner, Macadamian, with us today for our webinar. I'm going to introduce you to our presenters and their organizations, and we'll get started. Macadamian is a full-service UX and software development consulting firm specializing in digital and connected health solution creation. We recently exhibited with Macadamian at the Connected Health Conference in Boston. Had a lot of great interaction there with organizations, and we're thrilled to be teaming with them on several projects. Orbita has created a first-of-its-kind solution. Our software we use in conjunction with solutions like Amazon Alexa or Google Assistant, enabling entities to quickly and easily create and manage intelligent conversational voice experiences. And so for those of you familiar with content management, you can think about it sort of like WordPress for voice. And most recently, we've extended beyond the voice-first concept to offer a create once and publish everywhere multimodal omni-channel approach. You'll be hearing more about that in today's session. Two presenters. We have Ed Sarfeld. He is a UX architect with 20 years experience in the IT industry, and he's a leading contributor to Macadamian's M21 Labs voice UX efforts. He's worked closely with many types of clients on various platforms spanning industries from aviation to healthcare. He has an excellent comprehensive information architecture, user-centered design principles, interaction design, conversational interfaces, and visual design. We also have with us Bill Cava, who is Orbita's Chief Product Officer. He is responsible for our organization's product strategy and management. He is a user-focused product executive with a strong background in technology. Previously, he founded WiseMine, a software SaaS platform providing big data analytics for content marketing. He's a published author, technology advisor, and founder of the New Hampshire Data Science Group, holds multiple patents in information retrieval. Bill recently presented at Information Development World and was very well received with a keynote. Before we turn it over to Bill, I want to let you know we are going to be potentially doing some question and answer at the end of this, so please keep your questions in mind, and we will address those at the end. And you may have an opportunity to participate in some polls as we go forward. With that, I'm going to introduce it to Bill Cava.
Great, thanks, Beth. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
All right, thanks for that. So what I want to do before I get started with today's slide, actually you've heard a little bit about us and our backgrounds and the organizations we represent. I thought it'd be good to find out what industries you all represent. So I'm going to launch a quick poll to get that information, and I'll share the results as soon as we have them. So I can see the results coming in. And we'll let this go for about 15 seconds more. All right, looks like we got most everybody there. So in terms of percentages, in terms of the options that were presented there, the biggest category represented is healthcare, 54%. Actually, other is the second largest category at 40%. If we could have offered more options here, we would have. The webinar software that we have limited it to 5. So be curious to find out how that other category breaks down. But that's at 40%. And then small single-digit percentages across retail, financial, and education. So thanks everybody for taking that poll. We're going to have another one later on, but we'll get to that then. So to get started with the presentation, what I wanted to do is present essentially the benefits of a voice experience and contrast that with the challenges designing a user experience that either is exclusively voice or involves voice. And I want to do that because I want to really set up Ed's discussion, where he'll really dive into ways to mitigate those challenges and present some strategies for thinking about designing voice experiences that include other channels and modalities, and really start by kind of explaining first the benefits. So if you've if you've seen other webinars that I've put together, I talk about this a lot, that I see one of the primary benefits of voice is that it really comes naturally to us. It's uniquely human. Certainly other animals can communicate, but really only humans can communicate with the specificity and communicate such a range of ideas with such clarity. Animals, generally speaking, are limited to kind of categories of communication, for example, warning or danger. But as humans, we can formulate new ideas in our heads and communicate those entirely new ideas to other humans using natural language. And it shouldn't be a surprise that it comes naturally to us because we start learning this language in utero, right? Language acquisition starts there. We can differentiate the sounds between, our mothers and other individuals in the world, and foreign languages and our natural languages, and then we use the rest of our lives to, hone, refine those abilities. And as such, given all this, we're the experts. We start to use it from about 2 years of age as our primary mode of communication. We really don't stop. It would make sense that we're really good at it, and as such, we can speak much faster than we can type, for example. The speed of typing is, on average, for the average business professional, about 40 words per minute. So if you just look at this as kind of like a raw throughput of information, the primary modality we're using, the keyboard, is somewhat constraining our ability to express what's in our brains to this 40 words per minute. And you can think about the third benefit of voice is it's often available when other modalities aren't. So this really touches on the accessibility of voice. So, I like to consider the kitchen, the car, and the showers as great examples of situations where we're often in need of the ability to access technology, but typically the interfaces that we're using to do so really don't support, those three contexts. In the car, in particular, people are often texting and driving. That's extremely dangerous. You're in the shower, you're reaching over, you're trying to grab your phone off the counter, trying to keep it dry while you're accessing it with wet hands to access an important or to get an important phone call. Those are situations where we have the need to engage and access technology, but the modality we're interfacing really doesn't support that context. And you can also think about this from the perspective of individuals with disabilities, right? So there are individuals with visual disabilities or dexterity issues or mobility issues, and these may be issues that they have been dealing with their whole life, or they may be temporary disabilities that you're experiencing because you've got some temporary injury. And either way, those situations can make it difficult or impossible for an individual to interface with screen-based technologies or technologies with small screens. So I'm going to jump into this. I talked about the three benefits. Now I'm going to talk about the three challenges. And I'm going to start off with a really big problem with voice experience design, which is understanding what options are available. Particularly when you're considering voice-only experiences. As voice user experience professionals, we know that really good user experience is discoverable, and the notion of discoverability means that we, as users of a system, can easily find all of the elements and features that are available. And really, the biggest challenges that a voice experience designer faces is really conveying what the assistant can and cannot do. So let's say I'm a user engaging with a voice agent related to sports. As I launch it, I kind of have a vague idea that it's a sports-related agent or skill. What can I expect? Is it just giving me information about a particular team, or is it regarding the sports in general, or is it a particular type of sport? Is it going to give me information about news or headlines, so on and so forth? So it's really using the skill. I have no idea what to expect, really, what options are available. And so the big challenge, again, is orienting the user with what options are available. And additionally, once a user performs an action, how do you educate the user with the information around what more is possible? How do you encourage exploration? How do you correct errors? Or even how do you present a user interface that prevents errors entirely? And the challenge to create a navigational model really that's easy for a user to learn, understand, and remember leads us to the second challenge here. Really the challenge about way too much information, because the knee-jerk reaction that user experience professionals often have is to present all the options, explain everything, but this obviously presents its own challenges. Scientists have a term that they refer to as Miller's Law. It basically defines the average human's capacity for processing information, and it puts the limits there of the number of objects that a user can hold in working memory to be at about 7 plus or minus 2. But really, once you start to reach those upper bounds, you're really starting to stress the cognitive load of the user, really stressing the mental efforts that you're requiring them to exert to remember all that information. So, common sense, a good user experience shouldn't be stressful, so the challenge here is balancing the presentation of that information with the reduction of cognitive load to make it so that a user doesn't have to keep a lot of information in mind. So there's clearly a challenge here. The third challenge that I'll present is, did that work? So I successfully engaged with the agent asking it to perform a task or asking it a question. But how do I know what's happening in the system? Alexa gives you this kind of visual ring to give the user feedback that something's happening, but that's really a one-dimensional kind of feedback mechanism. So it's limiting. So how do you effectively characterize what's happening in a complex system? How do you present the user with information to help them feel comfortable with the experience, so they know that they may be waiting a couple minutes or something else, they can ask other questions while a long-running task is happening? So that's kind of 3 benefits and 3 challenges that are present with voice experiences, and particularly voice-only experiences. So in a moment, I'm going to pass it over to Ed, who's going to introduce a multimodal, multi-channel conversational experiences and discuss how they can be used to mitigate and outright solve some of the design challenges that I presented here. But before I do that, I just have one more quick poll that I want to throw out there, and that is asking you whether or not you've created a voice skill or app already. And so the options you have are, yes, we've completed a voice app, we have one in progress, or we will soon have the need to start one, not yet, but anticipate one this year, and no projects in sight for 2018, but we're curious and learning. All right, let this go for about 15 seconds more.
And while we're waiting for that, just a note that we will be at HIMSS. It's coming fast. This is the Health Information Management System Society, so those of you in healthcare likely familiar with it, and be sure to stop and meet us at HIMSS.
All right, great. So I'm going to close this poll out and read the percentages. So the largest percentage is, yes, we've completed a voice app or skill, and that's at a little more than a third, 35%. The next is split between not yet, but anticipate one in 2018, and no projects in sight for 2018, but curious. So those were at 35%, 30%, and 24% respectively. Then finally, the remaining 11% say that you do have a project in progress or will have one in progress in the near future. So if you add up the yes, we've completed, or the in progress, that comes up to about 46, so almost half of the individuals connected today are saying that either completed one or have one in progress. So those are pretty good numbers. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ed.
Thanks, Bill and Beth. Can you hear me? Just want to confirm.
Can you hear you loud and clear?
Oh, fantastic. What I'd like to do now at this point is we will be taking a look at the design challenges that we have when we're working towards developing a product. So I'll be taking you through some of the elements that a company or team should consider in order to design and deliver a successful product or service. But first, I'd like to start off by discussing what we mean by multimodal or multi-channel. In particular, channels being distinct from device types. So a channel can be the web, email, mobile apps, social media, online chatbots, even kiosks or physical locations like stores and so forth. Those are all the embodiment of what we consider channels. Now, for modalities, what we're looking at is a means that we can input information into some of these device types. So traditionally we are familiar with a keyboard, a mouse, and touch gestures for sure, but voice input now is becoming much more prevalent as we see the expansion of smart devices and smart speakers, in particular the Amazon Echo and the Google Home. So looking at this variety of components or touch points, I guess the question becomes, how can we design to be successful? Well, we must provide the user with an experience that contains three essential elements, and those are consistency, seamlessness, and that the design is optimized for context. And by this, I mean that consistency ensures that the experience is familiar when a user moves from one channel to another. So this could entail similar interactions, similar visual design, even the language that's used across these channels. All right? And by doing so, we're building really confidence and increasing the efficiency of the designs and features. And that really supports what the experience is for the end user. Seamlessness, on the other hand, is when a user must be able to start one task in one channel and complete it into another. And a good example of this is if you're searching Amazon for a product and placing it in your shopping cart on the web, and then later you open up your app and you recognize that, oh, it's also in the cart on your mobile application. So this then allows the user to purchase the item using their phone without repeating the search to find that item that they had done earlier. Now, this is typically a significant technical effort on the end of the development, but it really needs to be considered from the onset to be successful in this multi-channel environment. Context is the final thing, optimizing for context, and we'll be talking a lot about this as we move forward. This is where a user will be interacting with your product or solution. Where will they be? Are they at home, in the office, or possibly traveling? Are there barriers or social norms that limit the type of interaction modality in the particular location where they're engaging with the technology that they're using? From there, what I'd like to do is kind of explore what we commonly use for design, and that's personas. And those are to capture the end user characteristics. So they're more or less defined as the archetypical user of a product or service. And generally, this is there's a primary persona and potentially a secondary personas. And they define the user characteristics. Ideally, this is done through a primary research, but many times what happens is we form these out of our understanding or corporate understanding of what the end user may want or need. Now, it can include age, personality traits, their devices that they use, their technical expertise, goals, and really kind of what is their normal day. And personas can vary depending upon what product type you're designing. So really, what is the value of a persona provides? The personas are really a means to early on create alignment within your company or your team so that they understand and stay focused on a particular user group. And this is really relevant when decisions are being made and trade-offs need to be assessed, like what's important that we're going to continue to facilitate within our product. Now, one of the areas with the omni-channel and really the multi-channel delivery, we need to identify where the product is going to be used and how people will interact with it. And in many ways, this is a bit of a shift in our thinking from delivering on a single device, where we realize that a user will want to access our solution using different technologies in a variety of environments. And recently, this is where really voice is fast becoming a prevalent input method that should be assessed for applicability in various environments. And we'll talk about that as we move on to our daily touch points. Now, here's in this illustration, we need to consider what we're designing for, daily use and experience in multiple channels and devices. It's an illustration which kind of touches on what a user may encounter during their typical day, and they may be woken up by an alarm, by a wearable device or a smart device. They have connected devices in their home. They're syncing and communicating while they're commuting. They work on a computer or a tablet once they're in their office or for home. They use smartphones that are possibly connected through Bluetooth. And now, in particular, we have voice assistant smart speakers and actually devices that have these voice assistants embedded with them. Some thermostats have it, and the Sonos music system now does that directly. They have Alexa built into their speaker itself. Now, when we consider these touch points, we need to reflect on them and see how they inform how a user may wish to interact with your product or your solution. This takes me to something that was introduced some time ago, I think in the last 10 years. It's called a Playsona. It was initially developed by Canadian computer scientist Bill Buxton, and it really kind of includes the elements of a persona, but it focuses on the environment and the context of use within that place. They really define the location and situation of a user when they engage with an interface. So, as a shared resource, these Playsonas can provide a common language for stakeholders to discuss what's important when they're considering design trade-offs. They can do that in a productive way with a particular focus on what technology makes sense for the person to use in that environment. The significance of Playsonas really, in this instance, I'm going to show a couple of examples per se. The first one is a multi-person interaction, where we have to consider how one person who's on a bicycle has their hands and eyes are busy, but they can hear and they can use their voices, whereas a person in a library wouldn't be able to speak per se. They may have headphones on, they could hear, but really their hands, eyes, and ears are free. So each one can communicate, but they have to do it in a modality that supports the place they're in, the situation, and the situation they're in as well. A good example, another example for this actually, is that we can think about when we're in a kitchen, if we're trying to do something and our hands are busy, or dirty for that matter, and we prefer to now interact with voice. I have an Echo Dot in my kitchen, so I can use it to set timers and do things of that nature without actually having to use my hands. So in this place, there really are no limits to speaking aloud as we would have in a library, but the only things that we have to consider is making sure that we can be overheard by the ambient sounds of working in the kitchen or the household in particular. The second example of Playsona really actually tends to focus more on moving between devices and channels. And this is an example that I thought I'd draft up to say, you know, a person, let's say an example where a person is trying to purchase a television, and they've done some research on their laptop at home. And then they're out for an appointment with their children, and they're also looking on their phone for more information. They may have chatted with their friends through voice or text. They've gone to an electronics store because they actually want to see this before they purchase it. Then they realize, well, there's something on sale, and now let's check the ratings in the store on their phone. And they find that, oh, actually, the ratings aren't very good on what's on sale, and they really rather purchase the one that they had first looked for. But they realize there's a better price online rather than the than in the store that they're in. So they leave the store and they choose to actually purchase it via Amazon and through Alexa in their car on the drive home. In this way, the users moved across different channels as well as modalities and ended their experience while they were driving. And in that instance, their hands are busy, their eyes are busy, but their ears and voice are free. So again, it's kind of how do we share what is the best way to engage the user depending upon the environment they're in. So now that we've kind of looked at the environment aspects, I want to touch base quickly just on what are the best practices while we're designing. And these are elements to consider when designing your voice interface. Now, when to use a voice interface, it's really, we've kind of already touched on the fact that, when people's hands are busy, when people can answer quickly and easily, and maybe when you don't want to use a phone or a piece of paper. But we have to make sure that the context or situation allows for easy usage of voice. And we can prepare and practice when we create our voice interfaces. Now, typically that would mean write sample conversations or dialogues based on expected use cases. And in particular, I find that you really need to know your data. If you understand how the data is structured, how you are going to, the information you plan on sharing, as well as how you need to capture that information, you can then create decision trees that will reduce the number of touch points the user has with your end result, or your cues and your skill or your voice interface. This is just, I really, from my information architecture background, this is what I found in the last year of working on voice interfaces is really critical, because getting the language right and making sure that the path is correct is so important, and that really does revolve around understanding what is important to capture and to share. So as I like to continue with this, we can explore sample exchanges, and you can read those as you've written them out and hear how it sounds and flows, making sure that the dialogues sound natural and not like someone is reading like a spec document per se. We want to ensure that the language is correct for the context of delivery. In that light, there's also the personality of the application. Now, this is something that's quite fascinating in as much that a personality will help you focus the language of the conversation to choose the right words or syntax, really. You want to have the right sound, the right feeling of the conversation to make it more or less formal. And this really, what's interesting is that these personalities will frame the experience for the user in the way that you want them to experience your skill. If you don't frame it properly, then what happens is, by our human nature, we will assign our own impression towards what we think the skill is. Is this a formal skill? Is this, what is the, in the same way that we assess a conversation with other people. One of the other keys that I like to touch on is being brief and natural. So there are things that we should do and not do in this. To do, we want to be as formal as needed, but not, or sorry, informative as needed, but not more than that. And we need to really stay relevant to the topic. By that, we want to be brief and avoid ambiguity in the prompts and questions that we present to the user. We really want to stay away from the use of jargon, especially from our industry. This is one of those areas where it's challenging to ensure that we rethink the wording appropriately without having acronyms embedded within our skills or prompts. And one of the other challenges that I find is that we don't want to state the obvious when we're creating our skills. We want to, nor do we want to talk down to the users or sound like we're talking down to the users. They will not appreciate that as they use our interfaces. Also, moving on to the next bullet, limit choices and be concise. Now, provide the fewest number of choices required to support a flow. That kind of goes back to my earlier point of knowing your data. We want to support the flow. We want to make sure that the user is only asked the right number of questions. I recently had to, and by that what I mean is I recently had to work on a project where there were surveys involved, and it was really, you know, when you're taking something that is literally a list on a sheet of paper that you can visually scan and easily check off boxes, and turning that into a proper structure where branching can happen so that the user actually doesn't have to listen to that long list, but you've made the decisions that by saying A or B, you're only showing or presenting a portion of that list that is relevant to the user. That's the importance of making sure that we limit our choices and be concise when we move forward for the user to easily complete their tasks in our interface. Validating a user's input is also very important. We want to communicate what the system has understood. So, and that can be simply like use of confirmations or acknowledgements to instill user confidence. The confidence kind of reassures people that they've been heard. In many instances, what we use are confirmation saying something like great or okay, I got it, that sort of thing. And we use them in a random sense, in that we don't want to do it each time the user gives feedback, because then it just becomes redundant. But it's nice to have this sort of affirmation or confirmation that this is actually that I've been heard. In the same way, we need to move on when we're looking at a user's attention span. As Bill has mentioned earlier, there are limits to our functional memory, and when a user is busy or active, they want information or guidance and in brief chunks, let's say. That way the information is concise and can be chunked appropriately, so if they're really busy, they don't have to spend a lot of time focusing on what the answer is or how to respond to the question that was posed to them. Again, you know, the context of use should really inform how a prompt or response is structured for the user that way. Prompt for responses clearly. This is very key, and particularly for important decisions. Like, we use what is called an explicit confirmation for important requests. Let's say we're transferring money. This is where we have a prompt that repeats back what was heard. Let's say, so do you want to transfer $100? And it explicitly asks the user to confirm that action. So please say yes. Then we have something that where what's considered an implicit confirmation, and those are less consequential or impactful, let's say, and in that way we can subtly repeat back what was heard to give the user an assurance that they were heard or understood correctly. And finally, in this particular area, one of the things that I find that gives us the greatest opportunity are actually errors. And what I mean by that is that we have errors in recognition which occur because you may not have been heard properly. But there are also errors that occur when, say, in using Alexa as an example, the Amazon Alexa as an example, they time out. The user may be thinking about something, not sure how to respond, and the skill goes to sleep. What we've done is we've actually timed that, we've measured the timeout, and prior to the timeout, we would re-prompt them and say, okay, this was the question. Would you like to answer it again? Giving them another 6 or 7 seconds to think about the response. Or, in another instance, they've given the incorrect response, where we've asked for a yes or no response and they've stated something else. We would then repeat the question and say, and you can answer this yes or no. By doing that, let's use the phrase failing gracefully and ensuring that the user doesn't get kicked out of the experience and has guidance on how to correctly resolve the problem that they're having. Supporting different paths is very important in allowing an interface to respond fluidly to accommodate different user paths. This is one where if anyone has a Google Home or an Amazon Alexa device, Echo device, when you set a timer, you can say set a timer, or let's say an alarm for 8 o'clock, and you'll be prompted, is this the morning or evening, or AM or PM? Or you can say set an alarm or timer for 8 p.m. Both are recognized. In one instance, the skill prompts you to give you the missing information, and the other one, you've already passed that information along to the skill. Orbita actually does an excellent job this way in one of the projects that we were working on with them, where it learns a user's response, and you can start combining those responses. So if the first question is, were you feeling tired? And you answered yes. Then the second follow-up question was, were you a little tired, moderately tired, or very tired? And you would then respond, a little tired. Well, you can also go back and respond to that same question by saying, yes, I was a little tired. And they combine that response into a single answer. Really helpful for when we're doing surveys or responses that have to be repeated over and over again, and people understand or start to learn what are acceptable phrases and answers to their questions. And finally, the aspect that we think we know, and is what is a good conversation? And it's quite fascinating, and we naturally have a conversation, and we have a feeling whether this has been good or bad by the rules and norms that we've learned over our lifetimes. But have we ever actually taken that apart and kind of thought, well, what are those elements, and how do we embed that into our own skills as we build them? So that includes turn taking, right? So we want to avoid getting out of sync. What's called threading, and that's to keep a context or support a flow of an idea or concept. Speech efficiency, and those are things that we can actually, some things can be left unsaid, but they're still understood when we're writing it. So we don't have to fill in all the blanks in that way. And making sure that users are comfortable. And this kind of supports the different levels or experience levels by using a variety of words or styles to say the same thing as you're developing your voice solution. So following these practices, you should be able, this should guide you to actually a very good voice interface for your users. The one caveat, though, that I do like to profess after discussing some of these elements is that a voice interface is never really complete. So you need to factor in time to refine and polish the interface once it's released. And that can be done by using tools to gain insights from the end users and understanding how and where the users are struggling or enjoying their experiences. Developing a voice interface really is as much as an art as a skill in making sure that the language is right for your intended users. And with that, Bill, I'd like to actually pass it back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Ed. In the final couple minutes that I've got here before we open it up to Q&A, what I wanted to do briefly was give you an idea of the tool that Ed mentioned, Orbita Voice. It's Orbita's platform for designing, developing, and managing conversational user experiences, so multi-channel, multimodal conversational experiences that include voice-first devices like Amazon Echo, Google Home, and others, as well as maybe text-based conversational interfaces through web and mobile. So Orbita Voice is the tool that you're looking at on the screen here. This is a tool that is designed for two primary types of users. One is a less technical voice experience designer. That's kind of the domain expert who's familiar with the content, has the ability to create those conversational dialogues that Ed was talking about, and do so in a way that doesn't really require or involve any technical skills that would be maybe more of the skill set of a developer. And then the second user type we designed this for is a developer, giving them the ability to get in there and do the kind of more technical, deeper integration, maybe with a third-party system, et cetera, that voice experiences and conversational user experiences across modalities and channels often require. So first, interface. This is one example interface that we present to those voice experience designers, those conversational experience designers. And this is as a survey builder, and this is the kind of interface that you would use to design a survey that could be delivered through web, through voice, through a text bot. And I like to say, if you've ever used something like SurveyMonkey on the web to deploy a web survey, you know what it takes, or you have the competency required to create these conversational experiences that are based around surveys, collecting information from users. You know, simple drag and drop kind of interface allows you to, create the question, provide the responses, validate the input, and deliver that across channels. And then the other interface is more of an interface like the one I've got on the screen here that allows you to visually define the business rules, and this is our developer interface. It's kind of like a visual kind of workflow environment. If you've ever used tools like that, it'd be familiar and similar. But it allows you to peel back the onion and get into the internals, allowing you to customize as much as needed the flow of the conversation and the conversational experience. So that is really briefly an overview of Orbita Voice. If you're curious about seeing more, you can go to orbita.ai, our website, and we'll be happy to set you up with a demo so you can explore and play with it further. But with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. We've got a few questions here in the queue already, but what I would like to do is offer you the ability to go in and ask some more. So it should be open. You should be able to add your questions, but I'm going to start by asking the ones that we've got here now. Our most frequently asked question is, will these slides be available? So we're going to make all the slides available and a recording of this webinar available to everybody who attended, so we'll be emailing out a link including both of those resources. So yes. Does Orbita or Macadamia focus in on or work on non-healthcare related verticals? What I will say from Orbita is we're primarily focused on healthcare, but that said, our technology is agnostic in terms of what kind of use cases it can handle. So if there's a compelling use case and you're interested in considering how the type of technology I just showed could work, by all means reach out and we can chat to see how that might align. Ed, do you want to field it from the macadamian side?
Certainly. We have, of course, we have a focus on healthcare, but we're pretty broad in the areas that we work on. In particular, I've done quite a bit in the aviation sector, government sector, all sorts of projects, and most recently one of the voice projects I did was for a commercial product, actually kitchen product, that has a voice skill that's available, the Instant Pot actually, and it's been really quite fascinating to be able to work across different domain spaces, so we're not limited in that way.
Next question is asking for an example, real-world example of a multimodal interface, and particularly interested in the combination of voice input and screen input and voice output. So what I'll say there is the Amazon Echo Show is a great single device that provides that kind of experience. It's a voice-first device in that you communicate and interact with the device largely using your voice. It's designed for voice, but the device communicates to the user using both voice and screen. So simple example is I might say, Alexa, what is the recipe for marinara sauce? And where a voice-only response would give me the laundry list, and again, that kind of cognitive overload burden would be pretty high, and it would be difficult to keep all that information in memory. Contrast that with compare that to the experience with the Echo Show that has a screen built in, provides me the same verbal response, but on the screen it's giving the recipe that I asked for. So now I can hear it, but I can look over and feel comforted that I don't have to keep all that information in mind. That's just one example. I've actually got another webinar on the Orbita website that's recorded that gets into some more specific examples. So if you want to check out that, it's orbita.ai/webinars. Ed, anything you'd want to add to that, or other examples you've got top of mind?
No, absolutely, Bill. You hit it right on with the Echo Show as an example. And what you will find if someone does purchase one or has one, that the skills that are developed, some are actually developed specifically to ensure and embody the visual components of the Echo Show. Others do not. So that's one of the things that we have to take into consideration when you're actually designing the skill, that you have to do both the voice as well as the visuals to support a good interaction. It makes it a little more complex, but if you like puzzles, it's fantastic to do that design work.
And additionally, I'll say beyond the Echo Show, another concept that some of our customers are working with is this experience around using the voice as the primary input and response, but having a screen augment that experience outside of something like the Echo Show. So you might have an Echo Dot, which is the small little device that sells for, I think now, around $25 as the primary voice input, but connected to that experience is a screen, like a large screen monitor, that's providing the complementary visual information. So you've got the voice first experience through the voice first device, but then you have the complementary information complementing the voice experience up on a screen to mitigate the cognitive overload and such. So the question here is around strategies for designing conversational UX. What I will say about that is that often we find that the best person to design the conversational user experience is not a writer. It's not your best writer necessarily, because writers are typically skilled at writing for reading, whereas designing a conversational user experience requires a different skill set. I was having a conversation recently with somebody from Facebook, and what they said as a suggestion, they agreed with that, the point I was making, that it's not always the best writer. They said that they found that the best person for designing conversational experiences is a person who is essentially an empathetic communicator. So this is somebody who's has communication skills, but they're more adept at the softer conversational skills that are required in human-to-human verbal communication. So it may be your best writer, but it's got to be somebody who additionally has those empathetic communication skills. Anything you would add to that, Ed?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, absolutely. I think you've nailed it on that. One of the things that I found over time as I've moved through and practiced really it is, again, the balance between design and art is finding the right language to support the end user, and being empathetic is one way. As I focused earlier on understanding what a good conversation is, Paul Grice did some fantastic research on the nature of cooperative conversations, and that people by nature want to facilitate a resolution to your conversation. And an example would be, let's say if I were to ask you, or to say I'm running out of gas, you wouldn't say, well, how much do you have left? You'd say, oh, there's a gas station around the corner. And it's understanding that that's how people function and think, that you also have to take that into consideration as you structure your scripts for your skills.
Great. So another question here is, are there any devices that support or allow for video calling, that allow for video call integration into these experiences? Going back to the Echo Show as another example, or going back to the Echo Show, that's a great example of a device that does provide those types of capabilities. So you can actually integrate video calling. You can actually make phone calls and do similar things using that. So Echo Show offers those capabilities. How do you manage context? Essentially, I'm paraphrasing this question, but how do you manage context in conversations? That's a great question, because it's it covers a lot of things, because if you kind of tease apart context is kind of a loaded term. If you tease apart context, what makes up context? As Ed was talking about earlier, there's location, there's the the actions I've performed previously, there are the kinds of questions I've asked previously. There's who I am as a user, how do I differ from other user types. There's a lot that goes into context, and really, to create a compelling conversational user experience, you really have to understand context, because how frustrating would it be to engage with a skill, a voice experience, time and time again, but really not have it adapt to the fact this is the 100th time you've used the skill. You really don't need the explainer text in the beginning. So, maybe you have two different user types, advanced and novice, but novice user gets that introductory text, the advanced user does not. So that's one example of the importance of adapting to, the user's context and their persona over time to create those adaptive user experiences. Otherwise, people will get frustrated and abandon it and just won't have a compelling user experience. That in itself would make a great webinar. In fact, I think maybe that'll be the topic of one of the next webinars that we've got coming up, managing context. So great question. Thank you for that. Let me see if we can squeeze one more in here. While I'm looking, anything you want to add, Ed, about context?
I think you actually nailed it in one way, that the key is that for some of our users, what we try to do, or actually for all of our users, what we try to do is, if there's a first-time usage experience where we explain what the skill or what the action is doing, we actually only provide that for 3, possibly 5 times, and then we turn that off, because by that point in time, we're hoping that the user understands why they're there, what the skill does, and they don't need that information any longer. It just becomes a burden or a hurdle to their success in doing something quickly and being rewarded for understanding and learning what the skill can do. Again, because we don't have a graphical user interface, we can't support these things visually, but we can reaffirm and confirm these to a certain point, and then say, we're done. This, the user should understand this now. They can move forward, and if there is an error, we capture it and support them in an error state.
We're actually at the top of the hour now, so I'll be mindful of everybody's time. There are a bunch more questions, but we'll answer those questions in the follow-up email that we send out. I want to thank everybody for joining us and for taking the time to participate. We've had a great turnout here, and really do want to thank you for your time. Thank you, Ed, for your participation, and Beth, I appreciate your involvement and help as well. So thank you, everybody, and you can expect to see a follow-up email from us soon. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Bill.
And thank you all for joining.